Today you find that many of the businesses trying to embrace social networking are doing it really badly, because I think all it is having a Twitter identity or a Facebook fan page, but that's not how it works. You actually have to do it in a way that integrates with the way people want to communicate with a brand. So it's got to be a two-way communication. And the brands that discovered that early on and that perfected that early on gained a massive advantage in terms of their presence in social networks. Taking social networking apps mobile is going to transform it from being something that people who spend a lot of time on the internet are able to do or willing to do to something that everyone will be considering. And that's when you'll see social networking becoming part of the way we live, not just the way we network or socialize.
To help us unpack social business, I was joined by author Michelle Bronker from Vodacom Business, as well as Ingrid Lotzer from Puruma Business Communication. So let's unpack this discussion on social media and social networking. And I'm going to start with you, Arthur, and ask you, is it completely different, social media?
It's completely different, but it's also the same, because essentially the business principles that always existed of engaging with your customers in an ideal world, of course, still apply. So it's not a case of having to reinvent the way you think about business, but it's certainly changed the way many companies have to start thinking about how they communicate with customers if they've never got to grips with their customers before.
But is social networking not just some glorified form of word of mouth?
It is actually, Vusi. It's another way, it's another medium for people to communicate. So yes, it is in terms of people being able to say what they feel and word of mouth, but it's very different because it's not word of mouth just to my community, it's a bigger community, so it's much larger. When you're talking about consumer, absolutely it's another medium. When you're talking about companies that do business to business only, social media doesn't necessarily have to play as big a role as it would for a Vodacom or whatever it might be. So there are organizations that don't necessarily have to have a Facebook page. So yes, it is big, but not necessarily the same for everybody.
What was a tipping point, or turning point rather, for businesses? Because not so long ago, almost every company was complaining about all its publics sitting on Facebook all day long and losing man hours. And all of a sudden, everyone wants to get on board the bandwagon.
There were a few tipping points depending on the medium you're talking about, because each kind of social network or social media platform is really a different environment. So in the blogging environment, for example, it's when business started realizing that people were talking about them in this environment and it was a public conversation that they were not part of, and very often creating massive brand damage because companies were either not aware or not responding. And the more they didn't respond, the more it escalated and the more damage was caused. So it wasn't a single moment, but it was a process that in the early to mid-2000s became a kind of tipping point in the social media environment. In social networking, it was a case of companies realizing that especially when young people were joining these companies, they were expecting to be able to access Facebook in particular. And companies were banning Facebook left, right and center. So it became almost a differentiator for bright young people in who they would go to work for. And that particular moment when companies started banning Facebook on the one hand, or specifically marketing Facebook as something that they embraced, that created a tipping point as well.
How does one make this thing a success from Vodacom point of view?
Traditional media just doesn't cut it anymore. And we've kind of understood now that you can't have a monologue anymore with the consumer.
Sure.
It's about dialogue. The user is creating content, they're putting it out there. And you've got to move with it. You know, you've got to engage in this conversation. It's not about television ads, billboards, and traditional above-the-line media anymore. It's about engaging in that dialogue, understanding what they want. You can even innovate product by listening to them. They're telling you what they need, what they want. So it's a beautiful mix, and you've got to be there.
Tell me now, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have MySpace. Is there anything in the horizon that you think would be the next big thing, or are these things here to stay?
MySpace was the next big thing just a few years ago. And when Facebook came along, it was just about that moment that Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace because he thought it was the next big thing. But in fact, you could already see MySpace on the wane and Facebook on the rise. Facebook seems to be engaged in a war with Twitter on one hand. It's not. The two can coexist quite comfortably. It seems to be suddenly going to war with Gmail. And in fact, it's not a business mail tool, which is Gmail's big strength. So at the moment, what we're seeing is a kind of a battle for turf rather than for the next big thing. But while everyone's fighting out these big global large-scale battles, there are a lot of small players that are busy getting their business models right and that are going to emerge above the radar very soon. This past week just saw the launch of a new social network that looks a lot like Facebook but limits you to only 50 friends. And the idea of that is that you only share your intimate life with your closest friends. And someone made a calculation that said people only actually have 50 close friends at the most. So keep it to that and you create a far more powerful network, although far fewer people on it.
Yeah, you know, I asked this question because in this country, the figures show that as much as people may go online and look and see and chat and like certain products, the propensity to buy is quite low because there's a sense of it's not a safe space to trade. How do companies like yourself plan to break that paradigm?
I think there's going to be a proliferation of more social media platforms, but we're going to see a fusion between traditional e-commerce and social media networking platforms.
Yeah.
And they're talking about this next wave called social commerce. So now how do you take your traditional e-commerce platforms and the transacting online into the social media environment where the customer can buy something he can like? You know, people trust peer recommendation more than they do traditional advertising.
Yeah.
So that's the next wave.
I was just about to go there because I was going to ask the question, how do you turn all this chit-chat online into cash?
The key is to have content that has got a helicopter view. So I'm going to tweet about this. On Facebook, we're going to have that, but it feeds. So Twitter feeds my Facebook. This then feeds into my blog. My blog is going to be changed into an opinion piece, which goes to the traditional media because I still need to be there. So everything needs to be linked. And I think that's the gap with all the agencies and all the people having content that complements one another. Not necessarily that it's always the same, but that it's feeding the same message and the same storyboard.
Well, it's clear for, I suppose, the regular guy like myself that in future my network surfing is definitely going to be bombarded by some approaches from corporations, and may the best man win.
Yeah.
Yeah? Thanks for this chat.
Thank you.